Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. This video is going to be a continuation of the Gloaming, which is the campaign that I'm running using ShadowDark. ShadowDark, of course, is the dark fantasy role-playing game written by Kelsey Dion and published through her company, the Arcane Library. And by the way, the Gloaming setting is also written by Kelsey Dion and published through Arcane Library. It is the setting book that appears in Cursed Scroll number 1. So it's been a little while since I published a video, and that's because back in spring break, I was out for 10 days chaperoning or helping to chaperone a group of students at the school where I teach to Greece. We were over there, and I got to tell you, I had some serious ShadowDark inspiration over there. When we went to Crete and we visited the Minoan temples and the various museums, it brought me back to running Lost Citadel of the Scarlet Minotaur, which I know was inspired by those Minoan ruins. And I had been, when I ran that adventure, I'd kind of been building out my own setting, my own interpretation of the world in which that adventure written by Kelsey was situated. But I dropped it as I started actually running full campaigns for ShadowDark to use the stuff in the Cursed Scrolls zines. So I was kind of inspired to return to that. So maybe I'll continue to build out that world that I was building out. We'll see. That might be a summer project, but it was very cool to be over there. Since returning, I've been trying to catch up with class prep and winding down the courses I teach at the high school and winding down a course that I adjunct teach at a local university. So I've just been too busy to get back on my feet to publishing videos, but things are winding down. And so I think you'll see me return to a video per week soon. So, or actually right now, I think this will continue in that vein from this moment on. So anyway, that's where I've been, but let's talk about what we did last night, which is continue our Gloaming campaign finally. It's been a while. So let me go ahead and take us to my our Foundry page to catch up on where we've been. There we go. Is that showing the way I want it to show? No, it's not showing me. Hang on a second. There we go. This is what I want. All right. There we are. So, okay. So first things first, as you know, this is a game that I run for my regular gaming group. And that means we have a core group of about 5 players. And then there are players that come in and out, right? So it's kind of a rotating cast. This time, all of the players who have played in this campaign showed up. So we had a full house. Let me go through and quickly reintroduce you to some of the characters. Renwick, the human wizard, played by Jason. Renwick has parents who are diabolists, and he has come into this region trying to use the knowledge that he has to figure out what is going on and maybe help combat it. Rowena, the witch, played by Lauren. She is treeborn and connected to the parts of the forest that are sort of healthy, the pre-demonic vestiges of the forest, maybe an embodiment of that. We're not sure, but she is one of the characters that was born in the region and is sort of the hedge witch, I guess, if you will, of Wardenwood. Ursula, the half-orc fighter, played by Mike, and Ursula is an axe wielder and a staunch opponent of all the demons in the region. The party has come to rely on her strength and effectiveness in combat quite a bit. We also have Asher, the warlock, played by Mario. Asher's character is empowered. Sorry, Asher is empowered by Shun the Vile, and is one of the most mysterious members of the group in terms of what his motivations are. Ren, the bard, the human bard, played by Dan. Ren is Dan's third character. Dan, of course, played Sir Bernard, the beloved Sir Bernard, who died several sessions ago. And then Dan also briefly played Nixay, who was an elven ranger, but he wasn't vibing off a character very much, so he switched to Ren, who is a bard who is exploring this region, looking for lore and driven by mysterious voices. Then we have Kraith, who is played by Andrew, and Kraith is also a warlock to the Willowman. And despite the fact that he is sort of empowered by somebody that pushes him to cause fear in the world, he also is somebody who prides himself in keeping those who hire him to protect him safe. He, he sort of escorts caravans from Wardenwood to Marin's Hold and back, and he's a professional in those regards. But that is Kraith. And then we have Torsen, played by Adolfo. Torsen is Adolfo's second character. He's a dwarven cleric, and he basically made his former character's twin brother. Gendry, also a dwarven cleric, fell in the last session to the mutant catfish people that live here, mutated catfish people that live in Bittermold Keep, which was the adventure is taking place. And he died, and then while we were playing, Adolfo made Torsen, who's Gendry's twin brother, and we brought him in at the very end of the last session. New to us, this, or not new to us, he's played once before, but we also have Ishza, the goblin thief, who is played by Alex. And we have Githa, the halfling thief, played by Jen. And so what we decided to do to get those two characters into the setting is to bundle their arrival with Torsen's. Like I said, Torsen had come in at the very end of the last session. So we said that Torsen and the two thieves had come in at the very end of last session. We just picked up from that point. So I'm about to tell you what happened in the bowels of Bittermold Keep as the heroes continued their adventure. But first, let me give a very quick recap as to why they were here to begin with. Again, all the characters in here in this adventure, or most of them at least, are committed to kind of figuring out how to stop the increasing infernal presence that is in this region. They felt like they had exhausted the information, the lore, the resources that they had around Wardenwood. So it was Renwick, the wizard, who said we should go further east to Marin's Hold to see if we can pick up any new information there. Renwick had already been able to piece together that for some unknown reason, this region of the Gloaming about a century ago had the fabric of dimensions like weaken, and that infernal princes or infernal powers from various different planes seemed to be trying to enter this plane and were overlapping and converging in their influence in the region. So he'd already established that there is a rivalry between different infernal powers. He's only been able to really identify one of those, Unduluk, who is Legion and is coming into the world, rising through the marrow trees that come in, and they'd already tangled a little bit with Unduluk's presence. But so they knew that, and they were trying to figure out if they could get anything to fight them off. So anyway, they go to Marin's Hold, and they do gather some more information. Specifically, what Renwick was looking for was information about the Green Knights. He'd heard of the Green Knights that about a century ago had fought the infernal presence of these demon lords to some degree, but then succumbed. And so he was like, well, if we can find their stronghold, if we can find their ruins, if we can find something that maybe they left behind, maybe they're a key to helping us fight these infernal forces. So when they went to Marin's Hold, they heard of a keep, or the ruins of a keep that was north across the lake that the Marin's holders used to fish in, and that up there were rumors of a keep. And Renwick figured, well, a keep sounds like a place where knights would hold up. So let's go investigate and see if we can find anything about the Green Knights there. So the characters all piled into a fishing boat. They were dropped off. And I'm not going to, of course, recap the entire thing that happened, but they did not have not found anything related to the Green Knights. Instead, they found the three factions that are in Bittermold Keep, right? The Bittermolds themselves, who are the sort of depleted ancestors, not ancestors, descendants of the original Bittermolders, who are here worshipping some sort of power. I think that became evident maybe this adventure. The halfling howlers, right, which are this kind of barbaric group of halflings that has come in and is definitely worshiping something. They didn't know exactly what, but they talked to Gordok Brieg, the leader of this band, and he was intent on worshiping some sort of great power that would, erase this reality. And then they also met the mutant catfish that are here, that are preyed upon by the howlers, who actually eat the catfish, right? So catfish people. So they had encountered all these different factions. They had encountered the dungeons of Bittermold Keep, and they had kind of allied themselves with the howlers, and using the howlers encampment here as kind of their base of operations, they then forged into the west of Bittermold Keep to explore that area. And again, Renwick is still looking for sign of the Green Knights. Where we left the last session, they had come into this mushroom chamber, and they'd had an encounter with the gelatinous cube that is in the next room over, and they'd almost lost some of their party members, but they didn't. They were able to pull it off in part from some very impressive and creative thinking on the part of Craith. And when we pick up this session, we pick it up basically here with Torsen and Ishza and Githa coming in from the door to the south, right? The door to the south. Now, I gave a little bit of a snippet of information to those three characters, because the way we explained them being here was that Torsen had been looking for his brother Gendry. He had heard that Gendry had come up here with the party. He had secured the same transport that everybody else did up to the peninsula, where the Bittermold Keep is, and had come upon the ruins. But rather than go in through the entrance that the characters had come into, the original party had come in through, Torsen and we said Ishza and Githa came in through the water entrance, right? They for whatever reason had fallen into or gone into the water that runs from the surface down beneath, and they had come up to the, very near to where the party currently is. And I explained to them that they had taken a turn and seen, as they were exploring their surroundings down there, they took a turn to the west and they walked into a chamber where there was this oozing monstrosity that was purple and seemed to have stars floating, or you can see star patterns floating in its body, and it started to reach out to them telepathically. It started to open their minds telepathically. And I said, essentially, you failed your sand roll, to draw from a Call of Cthulhu reference, and you ran. And I told them, you run up a hall, up some stairs, up a hall, down the stairs, and basically that they took a few turns and they ran into the room where the player characters were. And that's where we picked up. The gelatinous cube has just been avoided, not defeated, but avoided, and it can't get out of the other room. And these other players have come in. And so then we rolled the initiative, and we went through initiative order to figure out just some non-combat actions. And what that basically looked like was that Ursula and Craith who had suffered acid burns from the gelatinous cube, were sort of slumped against the wall. Oh, and also Asher had also suffered those wounds. They were all kind of like slumped against the walls, just kind of like recovering. Torsen comes in and everybody's shocked at first because they think he's Gendry. They're like, wait a minute, weren't you dead? And then they start to realize, oh, he's wearing different clothes. It's like, oh, what is this? And then there's this moment where they share, Asher tells Torsen, I'm sorry, but your brother is to the east here and he's no condition to meet you. And he's died. And Torsen had some kind of, sort of like, a moment where he expressed grief, but was trying to hold it in and tried to make sense of it, tried to work through the anguish of losing his brother by going and tending to the wounds of those who had suffered. He's a surgeon and has, was doing his best to kind of like make them, the pain of their acid burns kind of more manageable. And then there was just a round of character interactions. And, Rowena was still kind of coming down from the high that she was on from the mushrooms that she had ingested. And she started telling Renwick, like, oh, you have this beautiful purple aura. It's so beautiful. And Renwick was just like, yes, my dear, sit down. Let's just stay here. Let's make sure you don't wander into a gelatinous cube. Ren, who was in the other room, pinned down by the gelatinous cube, like rushed past the now high gelatinous cube and got into the room and had some interactions with Githa and Ishza. So everybody was just kind of like orienting themselves, introducing themselves to one another, and getting settled down. So after that first round of of interactions, then they started to try to decide what they should do. And they debated because Ishza described, she was the one that described to Renwick what she saw, that mass, that purple, glowing, starry mass that tried to peer into their minds. And they were like, we don't want to go there. We don't think that we want to face whatever that was. And the party all seemed to agree, yeah, that's not a good idea. So where do we go next? And Ishza shared, well, we passed, aside from the direction we came, there were some doors and hallways that we did not go down. So maybe we could explore those. And if not, Renwick was saying, yeah, and we can also go further east. There were some sections of the keep, the dungeons that we haven't explored yet. So that's what they decided to do. They decided that they would go south and avoid the direction where the characters had come, and see what else was in this part of the dungeon. So let me see if I can get these tokens going in the right direction here. Okay, let me put Renwick. Yeah. Okay, so basically what they did is they marched down to the hold on a second. Let me do this. I am not always the most adept at using my VTTs, and I just lost all my light here. I'm not sure what's going on. Let me see. Goodness gracious. Hold on. I think I'm going to have to pause this and come back. Okay. So I'm back, and I've arranged the tokens in the marching order that the characters gave me, and position them as if they had moved towards the south, which is what the characters decided to explore. Now, one thing I should say is that as they were getting ready to leave the mushroom chamber, which is where I'm pinging right now, Asher, who's a warlock, and he can cast a light spell that creates kind of a Sith red colored light. He tried casting it on a shield, but he had a mishap, and the spell bounced off his shield and hit Githa, the halfling thief, in the head. And so her head was glowing red, right? So she's kind of like a walking torch at this point. Hit her in the back of the head, right? So it's kind of emanating from her like that. And so anyway, that kind of affected where Githa ended up going. She ended up going towards the front of the party. But anyway, this is the direction that the party went. And what they discovered was this room to the south that had a couple of jail cells in it. And in those jail cells were 4 howlers in really bad state, could barely stand, but they kind of animated when the characters came in and made their presence known. They, of course, have their filed down teeth and all of that. And at first they were kind of aggressive, but Ren stepped into the room and told them, like, I am, we know your tribe. We are friends with your tribe. We've helped you before, and then they're like, take us back to Gordok Breeg, take us back to Gordok Breeg, get us out of here. And they started rattling the cages. And they're like, take us back before he comes. They come back. And like, who comes back? And they're like, the bitter molds, get us out of here. And one thing I should say is that the way that the room is written in the adventure, the bitter molds are already in here kind of poking at their prisoners and stuff. But since I'd ruled that the characters, the 3 new characters had come up from the south and run down this hallway, I'm like, if the bitter molds had been there, they would have noticed that activity. So it doesn't really make sense that they would have been there. So I decided to just have the howlers in there by themselves for now. And I told myself the bitter molds will show up at some point. And in order to determine when, I'm going to roll a random encounter roll every single round until they show up, right? So, after a moment of talking, Ursula walked into the room and, with her powerful muscles, just gave the cage a mighty tug and just broke the lock, right? There's a chance for doing so in the adventure. And she gets advantage on the rolls. She was able to just break the lock and swing the door open. And at that point, Torsen also moved in, not quite as mighty as the half-orc, but he moved in, and he was actually able to also, with a couple of tugs, like break the other door. So Ishza was getting her lockpicks ready, but these acts of brute force allowed the situation to be solved differently, and so she wasn't needed for that. Now, as all that was going on, the other characters were moving around, and Asher ended up positioning himself over here. Kraith was positioning himself over there, so they were kind of guarding both directions that lead into this hall. And Renwick, noticing that the situation was kind of under control with the Howlers, decided that he was going to step into down. He returned up to this hall over here, and he decided to step into this room over here. And there was another Howler cage. Let me see who else I need to grab, because it was, I think, Ishza went with him, right? So the two of them went up there. I'm sorry, not a Howler cage, another cell, but there was no Howler in it, right? So they looked around there. There was nothing to be seen there. And then they decided to continue to the south. Now, it was right before they started to continuing to the south, however, at the beginning of that round, or at the appropriate moment in the round where Renwick and Ishza entered that room, I had Asher make because Kraith followed them when they went in there. So it was only Asher who was left behind in this hall, and I had him make a wisdom check. And what he noticed with that wisdom check is that from over here where I'm pinging, he could see the light of a light as if coming from a torch or a lantern illuminating that landing. And so he kind of stage whispers into the other room and says, like, somebody's coming, somebody's coming. And he ducked into this hall to not be seen. But when he looked back, he saw that a bitter mold came here, looked down this hall, undoubtedly saw Renwick's back, right? Gave a sneer and then retreated back in the other direction, right? So at that point, the characters, when Asher was like, the bitter molds have arrived, they all kind of positioned themselves. Everybody in that room with the Howlers all positioned themselves defensively. Torsen got behind a crate that he pulled in front of him for cover. Ursula ran across the hall and hid around this corner, drawing her longbow. Githa remained in this room, drawing her crossbow. And everybody kind of positioned themselves to ambush anybody that might come down that hall. In the meantime, completely unaware of any of this, Renwick started to proceed to the south. And he peeked into this room over here to the south. And there he saw that there was another jail cell, that this one, the cell door was closed, and that there was something lumpy in there that he could kind of just make out in shadow from the light spell that he was wielding. And Renwick has fallen for these things before and has also spotted them before, falling into them before. So I had to make a wisdom check because he didn't claim that he was doing this, but I had to make a wisdom check. He made it with disadvantage. He made it. And he noticed before stepping into the room that the ground in front of him was, completely clear of debris and completely smooth. And he recognized that as one of the acid pit traps that he'd had the misfortune of losing a shoe to in an earlier encounter. So he warned Ishza about this, and the two of them sort of stepped into the room. Now, in the meantime, while this is going on over here, the other characters are sort of still waiting in ambush, right? Waiting to ambush whoever might come in. But the bitter molds are not showing up. So they just continue to wait and wait and wait. At this point, Rowena, who thought we should warn the rest of the party, she came over here to where Renwick and the others were. And in fact, at that point, Jason, Renwick is very used to being around Rowena, and he realized that he kind of lost track of her. So Jason was like, Renwick starts to kind of like look around. Where's Rowena? Where's Rowena? And then he saw her come in, and then she warned them that the bitter molds had been seen. So like, all right, well, let's continue to explore this room. Long story short, they end up noticing that the lumpy thing in this chamber is a body that has like rubbery. It's a rubbery skeleton that's kind of has like that's kind of covered by purple robes, and they went to Ishza carefully kind of was able to unlock the door from her position and swing it open, and then she skipped over that corner to jump in, avoiding the acid trap, and she went to go search the body. And when she started searching the body, Jakku the Polyglot, who is a ghost, right? The ghost, the bluish glowing ghost of a man came out and addressed him, introduced himself as Jakku the Polyglot, and he addressed Ishza in Goblin, and also with the culturally appropriate, content that would come with such a greeting. And she responded to him and when Renwick looked over, I said, Renwick, you recognize Jakku the Polyglot. You knew him as a wizard from the north, and they're like, they started like talking. It's like, oh, old boy, how are you? And Renwick was like, oh, you're dead. He's like, I know, and they started talking, and Jakku started telling him like, that he'd come up to Bittermold Keep looking for lore because he'd heard of it. But before they could really get into it, and I'm going to stop moving tokens around at this point because we're at the position where I think everything happened at this point. But basically, while they were talking, Kraith, who is kind of over here guarding, noticed a light over here on this landing. The Bittermolds had come around and tried to see if they could, ambush whoever would be there from the other side. And when Kraith noticed that, Kraith like just took off running. He's like, I'm just gonna run up there and attack whoever's there. He knew it would be bitter molds. So he jumped over the corner here, and then he ran all the way up to the top. And he'd actually seen a bitter mold look. The bitter mold saw that the area was lit and started to shut down. He kind of covered his lantern, right? So the darkness started to settle in as he kind of backed into the hallway so they can plan their assault. But Kraith jumped up there anyway, and when he rounded the corner, it was dark up there, and he bumped into 4 bitter molds, right? And then the combat started. So at that point, Kraith actually fumbled his roll to attack. And so we said that, he swung in the darkness, hit the wall instead. The blow made him almost lose his grip on his weapon. So he kind of like ended up kneeling, holding the weapon, trying to get it back in hand. I told him he was going to lose his next attack. At that point, the bitter molds piled in to attack him. Only one of them could attack him that first round. That bitter mold missed. At this point, the other characters started to kind of reposition that round where that was happening. Asher, who was close enough to see, to hear what was going on and had been moving to join the rest of the party anyway, saw Kraith running up the stairs, and he did a full move so that he was able to position himself on the stairs too, but just a little bit down the stairs from where Kraith was. The next round, the bitter molds moved in to attack. One slipped past Kraith and ran and engaged Asher. So there was combat going on there. One attacked Kraith and also fumbled, and it was cool because the way that Andrew said, like, yeah, I parry the blow, with my sword, holding like my palm on the flat of the blade and the other hand on the pommel, and when one bitter mold had rolled to attack him, he said that's how he evaded that attack. And then when the other bitter mold fumbled, Andrew described how he shifted the weight of one into the other, and it was cool because it's almost like he had lost his attack, but because he was kind of narrating the way that he had been able to take advantage of the fumble and the way that he had parried, it was almost like he got an attack in anyway. I mean, he didn't, but just the narration allowed him to be like an active participant in this round where just the others were attacking. So anyway, long story short, like, that situation continued. The rest of the characters moved in and were launching missile weapons at these guys that were on the stairs. I kept warning them, like, do not have a fumble. If you roll a fumble, you're going to end up hitting your party members potentially, but they took the risk and nobody rolled a 1. And so the bitter molds were taken out. And at that point, they ended up having, they retreated back to the mushroom chamber, which they figured they could use to rest. And as they settled down for a rest, they had a conversation with Jakku, right? Now, what ended up happening is that Renwick bundled up Jakku's bones in the purple robes that he was in, and he cinched them up and tied them up, and he carried them with him into the mushroom chamber. So now Jakku is essentially a member of their party. Well, he's accompanying them. His spirit is tethered to the bones. And so they ended up having a conversation with Jakku, right? Now, Jakku said a few things, and we didn't. I'll just briefly say what he said. He said that he had come into this region maybe a little bit before Renwick did, looking for lore. Wasn't more specific than that. Lore that could be used, but he just said came looking for lore, and he said he ran into a couple of things. First of all, he had some run-ins with the Knights of St. Idris. Of course, Sir Bernard was a Knight of St. Idris, and Renwick had been suspicious of some things that he'd noticed in Sir Bernard. And then, of course, Greaves, right, the bandit leader who had also been a Knight of St. Idris, had proven himself villainous, right? So Jakku said, well, I had some nights with the run-ins with the Knights of St. Idris, and they made me feel uncomfortable. He said, but I think I was able to determine, or at least I think, that the Knights of St. Idris are the Green Knights, right? That they had been the Green Knights and somehow transitioned to being Knights of St. Idris. And he said, I've never been able to pinpoint their base of operations. I know they operate in this region, but I don't know exactly where. And I didn't make it my point to find out because they just made me feel uncomfortable. So that bit of information was given to them. He said that he had come up to Bittermold Keep for a different reason. He said the reason he came up here was because he had also heard of an elf. He'd talked to this old timer who said that as a child, essentially, he had heard of or had seen an elf who had come into the region calling himself Haldren. And he said in the stories he'd collected about this Haldren that there was a word that had somehow been associated with him. And that word was, and he said it, and I don't know what the word is. I didn't have this in mind specifically because I didn't know that this conversation was going to happen or anything like that. And I hadn't fleshed this stuff out fully yet. But I said, I'll make up the word later. But he said that, Haldren had been associated with this word, which Jakku knew had a resonance in elven culture, the elven kingdoms of the north. It was like a splinter of elves that had decided to mess with a kind of sorcery or work with a kind of sorcery that was sort of taboo. And that this order, basically the word was the title, a title for this kind of order of elven knights or warrior wizards that had pursued this philosophical orientation. And he's not sure about Haldren's precise connection to the term, but he knows that it was used in reference to him or by him. The way that he heard the story is that Haldren, in some sort of confrontation, possibly evoked the term. And so, he'd also heard that Haldren had visited Bittermold Keep. And so he had come to Bittermold Keep looking to see if he could find any signs of Haldren, and in doing so had fallen prey to the Bittermolds. He also told them that the Bittermolds had kept him around and alive as kind of a resource, apparently Jakku had some items of power that he was able to they took from him, and apparently he got the sense that they fed those items to their god, because he says that basically, and they were able to determine that Mugdalblub was when I forget when exactly it was, maybe it was in this conversation, but when I think it was when Ishza said, this is what we saw back there, right at the very beginning of the session, this is what we saw back there. I had Renwick say, in the books that you've been consulting, you recognize that description as being one of the powers, one of the infernal powers, Mugdalblub. You suspect that he's in a diminished state in this reality, but probably still very powerful. So they'd been able to piece together a good degree about what Mugdalblub was doing here, and Jakku was able to say, Mugdalblub is interested in consuming this whole reality. And yeah, they feed each other to it, right? Like the Bittermolds will feed anybody they capture to Mugdalblub, and Mugdalblub is eating this fortress, this keep. I mean, look at the condition it's in. He's absorbing it, and it's falling apart around us because Mugdalblub is here. But Mugdalblub has refined tastes, and he likes it when he gets something more than just vanilla, right? More than just, so they had fed some of the items to Mugdalblub. And then the way Jakku described it is like, and then I died, probably of boredom. It felt like it was probably of starvation, but it felt like I died of boredom. And then, you know, apparently he as a ghost has been able to parlay his way away from having his body fed to Mugdalblub just yet. So, you know, and then he was rescued by the PCs. But anyway, so they didn't find the Green Knights, but they did find Jakku, and Jakku was able to give them a little bit of information that could maybe they can use to figure out more of what's going on. Where we left it, they were in a little bit of a debate. They didn't know whether they should continue here. They were like, should we fight Mugdalblub? I think the consensus for most of them is that might be suicide. So they're not really interested in doing that. They're like, well, then how do we prevent Mugdalblub from going stronger? And they're like, well, does that mean that we have to, like, you know, like wipe out the howlers, or do we just confront Brieg and tell him to leave? And if he doesn't, like, kill Brieg, and then hopefully the other howlers will go away. But then if we do that, what about the Mugdalblubs? Jakku said that the Mugdalblubs do have a leader too, and he named her Plagrina. But then they're like, you know what? Even if we wipe out, all the people that are feeding Mugdalblub is still going to feed himself. He might like having servitors to help him do the job for him, but it just, his presence is consuming this place. So what do we do? And then they're like, well, I don't know. Does that mean that we leave now and try to find something that we can eventually use to come back and fight Mugdalblub? So they didn't come to any hard conclusions. The night was getting a little late by this point. People said they had to leave. So we said, that's fine. We'll wrap this up and we'll resolve it next time. So I'm going to be texting folks to say, hey, what is your plan? And see if I as GM can determine what they're going to do before we actually sit down to play again. But I think it's kind of a 50-50 coin toss whether or not they're going to stay and investigate Bittermold Keep any further right now, or whether they're just going to go and try to find something else. Either way is fine with me. I'd just like to know what I need to prep for next time. So that's it. That's what happened in our session here. The other exciting thing that I'd like to mention is that at the beginning of the session, we got our first character leveled up to level 3, and that was Rowena. She's played in every session, and she rolled well on the couple of times that we used the carousing table or the downtime table. So she just made level 3. And then at the end of the session, we had a couple of characters. I think it was Asher and Renwick, I think, both made level 3. I'm not sure that Ursula did. Ursula might be 1 point shy of doing so. But we're getting to a point where, it's exciting. This is the first time that we had characters that high, right? So yeah. So anyway, that's it. I think, I'm not sure when we're going to get to play this next, and probably next time we play, we won't have everybody at the table. I know that next week is a very small group of players, so we'll probably be doing something else. But yeah, we will continue the Gloaming and hopefully Midnight Sun as the weeks and months roll on. So I'll be sure to post once I do. In the meantime, thank you so much for staying till the end. If you did, I wish you good health. I wish you good cheer. I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.